Welcome to the WNBA Insider Podcast featuring Eli Horowitz. We've just recovered from a crazy WNBA Finals where it went to Game 5. Minnesota Lynx pulled off a heroic game, 85-76 over the LA Sparks. Eli Horowitz, how's it going by you?
Doing well. I needed a day to process everything before I'm really ready to dive deep into this, but feel good now. How about yourself?
I agree. I had to rewatch the game last night after getting some clips from the parade, and just watching the game over, I noticed a lot more holes and a lot more fault than I initially did. Have you had a chance to look at it over and kind of think of what's going on that end?
I haven't rewatched, which I will, but just taking a step back to process, not just Game 5, but Game 4. The Sparks did not play well. And I actually mentioned this to Pat Ralph at Excel Sports. Since the second half of Game 2, where the Sparks came back, they lost that game, but they played really well in the second half. Remember, they were down by 19 at the half and only lost that game by 2 points. Since then, I didn't see the Sparks play their brand of basketball for the rest of the series. And I feel like in Game 3 was more about what the Lynx didn't do, and the Sparks almost won by default. And then once the Lynx kind of figured things out, the Sparks never got to their brand of basketball. And you're absolutely right. As much credit as we need to give to the Lynx, the Sparks were a little bit disappointing on both ends of the floor.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking over the game, and I noticed early on Sparks did some different things that we hadn't really seen that much in the finals. I didn't notice. I even texted you about it when I was watching it last night. I saw Essence Carson get some early minutes, and I couldn't peg it on specific early foul trouble. Obviously, there were some questionable calls throughout the game that we as fans and as the players and the people involved in the league need to demand better reffing. But that's a whole nother story for a whole nother time. And I know you feel strongly and agree with that. But I just saw, all right, for instance, through the whole series, Elena Beard just didn't want the three ball. And I know, that's not necessarily her game per se. But, in the finals last year, we saw her make some daggers of shots that it looked like she didn't want the shot this year.
3-point shooting ended up being, I think, the second biggest factor after rebounding. A lot of attention has been spent on the rebounding. But the Sparks shot 2 for 18 from 3 in Game 5 and 5 for 22 in Game 4. And Elena Beard, you mentioned her. How about Chelsea Gray? She didn't hit a 3 in Game 4 or Game 5. They're just kind of thinking about that for a little bit and just thinking about how well she played in Game 1. Things fell pretty fast for the Sparks, especially on the perimeter.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the stats right now. They shot 2 for 18 from 3, and I remember in the post-game with Agler, coach of the Sparks, they asked him, they said, that they were kind of doing their thing, controlling the paint, and you kind of wanted to combat it through shots beyond the arc, and they just weren't falling at all. And they were missing open shots, too. And, I kind of wonder, was it like they were in their head, or what are your thoughts on it? You kind of have a better sense of the Sparks and their shooting process.
Well, first of all, the Sparks are not a great 3-point shooting team. The Lynx actually were a better shooting team by percentage in the regular season. So I think it's getting a little bit misconstrued, just in the sense that they're not some elite team. But I think it's more that the Sparks are more versatile than the Lynx, right? They can play inside and out. They can attack the basket. They can play fast or slow. And so when I read Agler's comments, I think it was more about that by not making threes, it kind of shrunk the court on them a little bit and made it where it was about the paint. And as you mentioned, that's advantage Lynx with the rebounding and the second chance points. So I honestly don't. The Sparks didn't need to shoot 50% from three. They just needed to be passable, and they were awful.
Yeah, 11%. I mean, look, the Lynx didn't shoot much better, shooting 20%. So it wasn't like the Lynx won it through that. But the way that Sylvia Fowles dominated the paint and just controlled every aspect of the game was just beyond impressive. I was with a large group of people, and every time a shot went up, her offensive rebounds were just like so poignant and powerful and at the right moment. And then her defensive rebounds just did everything else.
Yeah, Sylvia Fowles really put in the work last offseason to get stronger. And you can see it paying off because they could not move her. You know, how you rebound against somebody like that isn't trying to out-rebound them. What you want to do is box them out, push them under the basket, and let other people come rebound. And they could not move her. You know, and that's strength. I think a lot of people credit her height and her size, but I think it's a lot of the lower body. It's a lot of the work she put in. She credits the assistant coach who really worked with her on that part of her game and that part of her body and her strength. And it was pretty impressive to watch.
I got to say, looking at the Lynx lineup stat line, I'm just so impressed how, I mean, the Sparks, I think, they really come at the Lynx in a completely different way that most teams don't have the ability to, just because of the sheer talent that the Sparks lineup has. And I just love how in this game they really pushed the Lynx. Now the Lynx end up winning, but they pushed the Lynx to a point where their starting five, I don't remember a series or a game where the Lynx have had to have such efficiency in some way from each of their starting five. Normally they can kind of lean on Fowles or lean on Moore or lean on Augustus. But this game, I mean, every player came to play, and it was just impressive to watch team basketball at that level.
Yeah, that was a big part of it because I think with LA, we just saw some up and down play, right? The highs were very high. We had, Chelsea Gray putting together probably the best individual performance of the whole series. But then the lows are low, where she doesn't hit a three in the last two games. You mentioned Elena Beard up and down play. We've talked a lot about Candace Parker's up and down play. NECA only had 3 rebounds last night. They can't win with her only getting 3 boards. So I've said it all along. The Lynx are just a little bit more steady. You know what they're capable of. You kind of know what they're going to give you. The Sparks have a higher ceiling, but the Lynx are just a little bit better, I think, on average.
Yeah, I think when the both teams bottom out, the Lynx are a little bit better. And I think when you're playing such a physical in the WNBA long series of 5 games, it really, a lot of times you're going to force, and they a lot of times did force each other to play their worst basketball because you're playing against such amazing defenders. And when that happens, the Sparks are just a tad lower. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I wanted to ask you about NECA because I feel like we agree based off this year. Like, I agree with what you just said. But it just popped in my head. Like, I feel like last year, NECA really kind of competed with Sylvia on the boards and put a different stamp on this series, not just the game-winning shot, but just her boxing out, her overall impact. And I felt like Sylvia just really dominated her overall in this series. What were your thoughts on NECA's play? I mean, I have my theories as to whether or not she was 100%, but everyone was banged up. So what did you see from NECA? And I'm just kind of curious, looking forward, like, what kind of player she can be.
My thoughts on the playoffs in general / the finals between the two of them is NECA played a much more physical semifinals going up against Brittany Griner and the Phoenix Mercury. Not to say that the Lynx semifinals wasn't physical, but it was a much different game, and Sylvia was and is on such a different level than most players in this league that it didn't toll on her the same way it told on NECA. Now, when you get into the finals and then clashing, I agree. I don't think she was 100%. I don't know necessarily if it was, a specific injury or just overall she'd been so banged up, got a couple knocks to the head, a couple knocks to the face, a couple knocks to the leg and like her ankle or her hand or something, I think at one point. So, like, obviously she's extremely banged up. I know you look at, like, on the Lynx side, I think probably the most banged up was Simone Augustus, who got her knee drained, the day of the game. I think when it came down to it, when you're 100% right, when you look at last season, NECA was a force, and she was on a mission, and she was using her athleticism and her speed kind of to bring the game to a different aspect than what Sylvia Fowles wanted. Now, that included at certain times muscling her out, but I think because she was able to kind of use some of Sylvia Fowles' energy against her and then use strength when Sylvia was a little bit more winded and just kind of a mentality on that aspect, she was able to get a lot more done. In this series, Sylvia Fowles, and she made reference to it many times in post-game interviews, she was just on a mission that she was going to control the paint. And that's what I think her focus was all season. Every time she played anybody, it was working on a different aspect of something to get ready to be able to just completely dominate NECA. And I think that's what we saw. Now, moving forward, I think we're going to see the same thing from NECA. And it's kind of like we saw in the series where it was just punch and punch back.
Yeah, that was kind of fascinating to watch unfold. And another thing I think we texted about it was, were you surprised that they didn't try Candace Parker more on fouls? They pretty much stuck 100%. With NECA. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm curious your take on it, because my thought process on that is, if I'm at least thinking back to last season, and I know it's a different series and blah, 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 but looking back to last season, Parker, I think, in some ways is better suited to cover Sylvia, and then you can start getting NECA moving and involved in the game in a different way, which kind of bumps up. It's kind of like with a shooter. If you get the shooter fouled so she can get to the line, she gets a couple of easy baskets, and all of a sudden she's warmed off being a cold streak.
Yeah, I think the rationale was, hey, NECA is our best rebounder. We're going to put her on Sylvia. We'd rather have her get in foul trouble than Candace Parker. We'd rather use Parker as a roamer. I think they thought of it as Parker can guard Brunson and kind of help and double team and use her length and tip balls. And they definitely got some deflections that way. But playing devil's advocate, Candace Parker is longer. I think she just disrupts Sylvia's shots just by pure height and length. And NECA then can use her speed to kind of be a help defender and play off. And I think she would have been a little bit more aggressive once Brunson did get going. I feel like NECA would have accepted that challenge a bit more. And I think it's one of those things where you can go 50-50, mix it up in different quarters. But I think we saw, too, in the semifinals, Parker was pretty effective on Brittany Griner because of her length. And then NECA could come and be the one to double. So, I don't know, I'm a little torn on it because I think one-on-one, Parker is the better matchup. But Parker is really good at kind of coming over to double and getting her hand on balls, and she gets a lot of steals. So I think Agler really wanted to kind of use her as a free safety, if that makes sense.
I agree with that. I mean, hearing you say that, I can't help but just think that, last year, okay, Parker got MVP of the finals, and everyone's seen that stat, and you've mentioned it a few times. When the Sparks beat the Lynx, her stats are she's averaging 20 and 10 or something. And I think, I don't want to say that got in his head, but it seems from the outsider's perspective, it seems like they were kind of playing to that, because I feel like they were basically saying, okay, we need a big game from Parker, and if she's going to do that, then we're going to be able to win, and she's the one that we need kind of, dipping her magical toes on everywhere, as opposed to in a previous year or in previous games, they might have looked to Nneka to do that. But this game, there was an emphasis on it's going through Parker. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little frustration in the background because, again, the Sparks are a very talented team. And I know Nneka got injured, but she got injured because of how she kept 2 on that assignment. Like you're saying, we didn't see a chance where they really switched her out because of foul trouble until they really had to. And then she got fouled out when she got back in.
I think another point, you brought up relying a bit much on Parker is getting back to Chelsea Gray. I would have liked to see using Gray kind of almost like a JJ Redick, setting double screens and kind of forcing the issue. I felt like in Game 5, getting her some open threes early in the game, like that's a player that you need her 3 game. It just opens up the floor. And I felt like, I think we were texting about it, like part of the reason the Sparks are so good is because they play like a read and react offense that maybe isn't scripted. But I feel like in this scenario, I would have liked to see a little bit more script to make sure they got certain looks. Because I feel like Chelsea Gray has her moments of being really assertive, but it seemed to come in waves. Whereas like Odyssey Sims, she has no problem being aggressive. And I feel like with Gray, you got to run some double screens, try to get her some open looks. And I was a little disappointed. There were so many instances where I feel like they didn't get the right shot. Even at the end of the game, they were down 5 and Odyssey Sims like jacked a 3 from the corner. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. That's not the right shot there. Even if it takes 5 more seconds, yeah, like that was frustrating. Like that was a point where it had to be Gray or Parker in my mind.
All right, Weiss. Why didn't, I saw some people tweeting about it during the game when I was doing some live tweeting. At certain points with the double teams and the focus that certain players were getting, throw in a specialist, throw in Sydney Weiss, let her drop a couple shots. Like, what else? What do you have to lose? Also, to your point that you were just making, I don't want to put this on Agler, but like your players are giving it their all. Yeah, they're the ones doing the read and react, but whatever. At certain points, you need to step up as the coach, and you got to say, hey, I'm putting my foot down. You guys, this is our process, but run this style play. Or, just something. Something as the coach, you need to step in when your season's about to fall away from you. You had a lead in this series. You blew it at home. Obviously, you can argue there's an asterisk there, but either way, your back is against the wall. You guys were down the whole game. You got to take your stamp on this.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to talk more through the offseason, like on the lack of using the bench. Raquana Williams, I thought she played well when she was out there in this series, and I thought she deserved more minutes, and maybe Gray and Sims did fatigue ultimately. But Williams, I think, was capable of more, and she's a player that she can be a little bit erratic, but you got to play through her a little bit. You got to give her a couple shots to get going, and I think you saw in Game 5 she hit a few shots that were important. You mentioned Weiss. I mean, I don't think she was going to play in Game 5 after not playing all series, but I watched her shoot for about a half hour at the Staples Center before Game 4, and she can really shoot. So... And, the Lynx played their rookie, Alexis Jones. So, again, different coaches have different styles. Like, it's hard to criticize either of these coaches because of their resumes. Like, Agler has 3 championships. I think if you include the other women's professional league, he's, up there in all-time wins, if not first. I think he's, all-time in women's basketball professional. But not in WNBA or something like that. But
there's some confusion because he's all time women's basketball, and I think is it Coach
isn't
Coach
Tebow? Yeah, Tebow's all time WNBA.
Yeah, he's like the WNBA all time or something.
Right. So I mean, it's hard to criticize him, and as someone who's coached myself, it's very easy to criticize till you actually have to do it. But that's our job right now, to analyze this series. And if we're just talking about Agler and Reeve, I do feel that, she outcoached him in the second half of the series, and both X's and O's, but just pushing all the right buttons, like she canceled after game 3, she canceled practice the next day, for example. Now, I can't read minds. I don't know why she did that. I don't know, what the rationale was, but obviously it worked. You know what I mean? Like, she just seemed to push all these different buttons in terms of the intangibles, the mental games, that were pivotal.
I mean, did you see the pregame warm-up they did on court before Game 4?
Yeah, I was filming some of it, posting up, going hard at it. Waylon, Augustus, and Brunson were the first 3 out there on the court after they struggled in Game 3. So there's something she does that just seems like they always respond the right way.
And that was the other thing that I noticed throughout the game, and I mentioned this to you again. We were texting throughout the game, but I mentioned this to you. At a certain point, it was just very obvious that just how the teams were carrying themselves and kind of the eeriness about both teams. At a certain point, I mean, there's a point the camera was on the Lynx bench during a timeout, and everyone's talking, and Simone Augustus kind of just yelled, "Everybody be quiet," and everyone just kind of settled down. They listened to coach, and from that point on, there was just this calm about them, like we're on a mission. And I never saw any player, and I texted you this when I was rewatching it, I never saw a player kind of take that leadership, or even Agler take that leadership. And again, I'm not criticizing him in that sense or any way, because he's too far beyond for me to criticize him in any way like that. But what I'm saying is nobody kind of stepped up in that moment and said, "Calm down, we got this." And I think, I was looking at video of game 5 last year, and Sparks players were doing that, and they just seemed more calm and focused and embracive of the moment than they were this year. And it was kind of a flip of the script.
Yeah. Did you notice also down 3, the timeout before Maya Moore hits that big shot? Did you notice Agler asked his players what they want to do?
Yeah.
You notice that?
Yeah, I thought that was very odd.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because that's very odd, right?
That's extremely odd. Now, the skeptic in me wants to say, he kind of was pissed off, and he's like, "What do you guys want to do?" To me, it kind of felt like him being like, "All right, I called some plays, and you haven't really been listening. What do you want to do right here?"
Yeah, is that like LeBron calling off, what's that coach's name who got fired halfway through the season?
David
Blast?
Yeah.
Is that like LeBron calling off the play, or is this more of like hey, we're a one team, one family, I trust you guys, it doesn't because the situation, let's recap, they were down 3 with 30 seconds left, so they had 3 options. They could have either fouled right away to extend the game, they could have played it out, or what they did, which was kind of press up, try to get a steal, try to force a quick decision. Now, there's arguments to be made for all 3. I kind of feel like a coach would have decided that in the offseason. That's like a philosophy thing, we foul in that scenario, or we play it out, or we press or trap. So I was a little surprised that he didn't just make a call there. Hard to know without being in that huddle. Like you said, was he kind of okay, they're not listening, so let them make the call, or was it a positive thing? But definitely just can't imagine many coaches not making that call.
I cover the Minnesota Lynx much closer than I've been able to cover the Sparks, and you've obviously been able to cover the Sparks much closer than you cover the Lynx. So I think take this with a huge grain of salt, but just from what I've watched in pre-finals preparation and whatnot, it seemed like there's much more of a family atmosphere. We all take an equal burden type thing from the Lynx than the Sparks, and And all right, I have my own beef with the style of Candace Parker complaining after penalty or fouls, and some of the comments she makes or posts that she makes on social media. But that's a completely different story. But what I will say is, based off the game and seeing her expressions to the refs and things like that, I wouldn't put it past that Parker or even Chelsea Gray or somebody, or took it upon themselves to audible because they thought they saw something, and in typical offense, the way they run it, they feel like they can do that.
Yeah, and frankly, I like the way they played it out. They were aggressive. They almost forced the Lynx to throw it back court. Candace Parker almost tipped the ball. And frankly, the shot Maya Moore took, you could argue, was a bad shot. Because, first of all, there was no Lynx in the paint. So that was a one-and-done shot. And a lot of coaches would argue that was not a good shot, like in that scenario. Like, you used the whole shot clock. Like, if she misses that shot, there's going to be a lot of criticism.
Oh, if she misses that shot, the Lynx are most likely... Look, even as someone watching the game, there was still a moment of, and this is something that surprised me with the Sparks, because to me, and I'm just going to put this out there, it didn't seem like they wanted it. And when I say that, what I specifically mean is the Sparks, we go to Game 5, and throughout the whole game, I saw players passing not for that better shot, but passing because they didn't want the shot. And then when we're late in the game, late in the series, and the Sparks are it's a 3-point game, and the Sparks have a chance to get, I think the Sparks had the ball and it was a 3-point game or something about that at some point, and under a minute left, under 30 seconds left or something. And they didn't set up for a smart shot. I think that's when they did was it Odyssey Sims who hit it from the corner? It was just a horrible shot, waste of a shot. And you're looking there exactly. Like, do you not want this win?
Yeah, that was weird. But when you were talking about how the analysis is watered down, that Maya Moore shot just comes to mind because, again, any coach I've ever talked to would say, why would you take a mid-range jumper with 20 seconds left when you could milk that clock down to 7 seconds or whatever, or 10 seconds?
I think it was the case. I think it was 100% a case that she couldn't stop herself. She was just moving too fast from the move before.
Yeah, and look, she deserves that green light, and she's so good you kind of have to live with that. And I guess the counter argument is, look, they could have let the clock go to 10 seconds, but Maya taking a mid-range shot is probably a better shot than somebody having to jack it up as the shot clock's expiring. I'm just saying the Sparks defense actually kind of worked there. The result just didn't work out for them.
Yeah, and, listening to interviews from both teams, the Sparks did an amazing job of keeping up their pressure defense the whole game, and even in those final minutes. So I don't mean it in the sense they didn't want it at that point. Defensively, the Sparks put to work the Minnesota Lynx offense. I think it was a big case of, the Lynx were a little bit worried, okay, let's get this shot off, because the Sparks defense is playing that good. And if we don't get that shot up, like you were saying, we might be forced to lob it up on a bad play.
Yeah. But I agree. Offensively, I was frustrated all game. That Sims 3, not getting Gray involved, not getting Nekas involved, being impatient, a lot of jumpers. Even Jantel Lavender hit a bunch of them, but for some reason they just refused to take 3-pointers. They continue to just take long twos. So I feel like shot selection from LA just isn't that great, but they're so talented. It works most of the time. But against a team as smart as the Lynx, they just weren't as sharp as they needed to be from the coaching staff to the players.
One of the things that I noticed was Chelsea Gray just it was a masterful performance of how she would find her that mid-range shot and that fadeaway. And I lost track of how many times in the series she would just dive in, hit the free throw line, take a step to the left or the right, and just dive back for a little fadeaway. And she was like 100% on that.
Yeah, I mean, she's very talented. But again, that's a really hard shot to make, and they're relying a lot on shots like that. And I think fouls, that's again speaks to fouls' importance, is that Nneka and Candace just couldn't get the type of layups they do against most of the league. And so now you're forced into a lot of tough mid-range shots, even though Gray is capable of hitting those, and a lot of threes, which they just couldn't knock down.
Yeah, I mean, I really, truly believe, and you said you thought you saw it in Game 2. I saw it more in Game 3, where there was just kind of like this moment where the Lynx went, okay, we got this figured out. We got this. They didn't close out Game 3, and I think that was due to just some atrocious shooting at certain points of the game. Some were bad shot choices. Some were just, they couldn't get it to go. But Game 4, the Lynx were on a mission. Sylvia Fowles, I mean, all right, she was undeniably one of the best performances I've seen from a player going up against elite talent in a long time. But I think a lot was overlooked about the importance of Rebecca Brunson and how she could have been in the discussion for the Finals MVP. And I know we got to get going, but I do want to say Rebecca Brunson in the sense of this team does not win without Rebecca Brunson. Without Rebecca Brunson, none of their wins happen. The hustle work and the diving plays and the grind she puts in. What are your thoughts? What do you think? Anybody else on the Lynx stands out like that?
I think everyone deserves credit in that starting five. Like you said, Brunson's the reason they won Game 4 and got up to a hot start in Game 5. Fouls, obviously, on the glass. Maya, it wasn't Maya's greatest playoff series ever, but she consistently made shots. I think that was big for Maya. Even in Game 3 where they lost, she had 16 in the second half, gave them a chance. So I think she was solid. Lindsay Whalen, I think, was huge just in the intangibles of Game 5. I feel yes, we talked about the refs, but it was also just the loose balls, the aggression. Actually, this guy, Michael Brunwasser, I'll shout out to him because when we used to play basketball and I was someone who would always get heated with the refs and stuff like that. And he was kind of that hustle player like Lindsay Whalen. And he would always tell me you kind of put yourself in position to get calls. And I think it's true. I think it's hard. The refs, they get into the moment too. They're humans. They see somebody diving on the floor like Lindsay Whalen, and I feel they start to give that team the benefit of the doubt, And then they see another team that's just complaining, and then they start calling stuff on them, which I don't think is right, but it happens. And then I think I'm forgetting Simone Augustus. Had her knee drained, but still scored 14 points, had 6 assists. When Nneka fouled out, she had a big 3 on the very next play. And so she was solid as well. So I think they ultimately did it by committee. I thought LA was more talented and was going to win this series, but I think I underestimated just kind of those X factors because, for the coach in me, it's that stuff that's hard to quantify. And I felt the X's and O's would go towards the Sparks, but so many of those hustles, rebounding, intangibles were just very lopsided ultimately.
I hear that. Well, we're logging off for the WNBA season, but that does not mean we will be done covering women's basketball and WNBA. We got updates on players overseas on the website, and we're hoping to get some interviews with some coaches on their movements for next season and such on, and then discuss it with Eli. Eli, great having you on this season, especially for the finals. Where can fans find more of your work, and what are you looking forward to over the offseason?
Yeah, Twitter at Coach Horowitz 13, freelance work at Excel Sports. I'm going to be doing some NBA writing as well as we get started for that, some women's college basketball writing. So definitely check some of that out, and I look forward to continue to podcast and talk in the off season.
All right, man. You have a great night.
All right. Bye-bye.